Well, welcome everybody to today's Vermont Vegetable and Berry Grower Winter Webinar. We're going to be talking about the worker protection standards and fire safety for farm worker housing. We have David Huber from the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets, and Michael Desrochers, Executive Director of the Fire Safety Program. I'm not sure which agency you're with. Maybe you're your own agency, but we're going to kick it off with WPS and David Huber. Take it away, David.
Thank you, Vern. And hi, everybody. I'm Dave Huber, Deputy Director of the Public Health and Agricultural Resource Management Division at the Vermont Agency of Agriculture, Food and Markets. We regulate a lot of agricultural inputs and outputs. And one thing that I would like to talk to your group today about is the worker protection standards. I'm going to go through a slide deck of the worker protection standard, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about H2A housing, and then I'm going to talk about the packets of information that we hand out while doing H2A housing inspections. Try to do all that in about 20 minutes. We shall see how far we get along with that. All right, excellent. So worker protection standard, when pesticides are used in agriculture, forestry, and nurseries. And like any good PowerPoint presentation, I would like to go almost all the way to the very end to show you the gist of this. The three main tenets of worker protection standard, which are obviously found at the very end here, are informing folks about pesticide safety, protecting individuals from potential pesticide exposure, and mitigation. Pesticide exposures have to be mitigated when they do occur, and making sure that folks are working in fields and not having to worry about the pesticides that they're applying having any sort of adverse impact to them or their health. So you might be thinking, where can I get some information on the worker protection standard? Well, you can certainly go to the EPA's website and get information, or you can go to the Pesticide Educational Resources Collaborative, which I have linked here on the screen. And PERC, just for the acronym, what they do is a lot of pesticide education across the nation. And if you're interested in learning more, you can go to their website, pesticideresources.org, and then click on the tab that you see here that says WPS. And once you do, it'll have this menu pop up, and you can take a look at all of the worker protection standard issues and resources that they have available for you and to the public. And so this includes the full inventory of WPS training materials. And then once you click on that, you can then navigate for agricultural employers. And so this will help everybody as part of the VVBGA, because presumably some of you have some staff who might be in the field, and some of you might be applying pesticides. And so as an agricultural employer, this website might prove to be very helpful and beneficial to you. So when does the worker protection standard apply? It applies when there's an agricultural establishment where ag pesticides are used. There's a whole bunch of pesticides out there, but we're specifically concerned for worker protection standard with agricultural pesticides. And as you can see from the screen, there's a label here. This is a standard pesticide label, something that you would see on most pesticides. There would be a label. We're talking about usual pesticides, not necessarily 25B products. And here there's an actual box for agricultural use requirements. And if you look inside of that box, there's a couple of parts that are really pertinent. It talks about PPE, personal protective equipment. It talks about REIs, the restricted entry interval. And most importantly, where it says agricultural use requirements, the first sentence says, use this product only in accordance with its labeling and with the worker protection standard, 40 CFR Part 170. That's where you can find the worker protection standard codified in federal rule. So who does the worker protection standard apply to? Well, it applies to a whole host of folks: farms, production forestry, sod farms, orchards, list goes on and on. Rangeland, where forage is harvested if you're growing plants. We don't have a lot of rangeland, but we'll talk about it just briefly. Organic pesticides, anyone who has an organic operation but uses organic pesticides. Restricted use products, general use products. In Vermont, restricted use pesticides are classified as Class A. You can find those on the Vermont Agency of Agriculture's website. We have a whole list of all restricted use pesticides. General use pesticides in Vermont are classified as Class C. And much like the Class A restricted use products, you can find a list on our website of all general use pesticides. We also in Vermont have Class B, which is in between those restricted use pesticides, which we say RUPs, and the general use pesticides. They're still restricted, but they're not considered restricted use pesticides. Obviously, when we're talking about pesticides, as I'm sure everybody is aware, we're talking about any item that is stemming from FIFRA, which is federal law, which stands for the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, Rodenticide Act. It's important to note that because when we talk about pesticides, we're talking about everything that falls underneath that umbrella. Herbicides, fungicides, insecticides, pesticides, you name it. And so when we're talking about herbicides, and we're talking about fungicides, and we're talking about insecticides, just keep in mind, we're talking pesticides. Are there any exceptions to the worker protection standard? There are. If you're using ag use pesticides on non-ag plants, then WPS would not apply. If you're using ag use pesticides that are attractants, repellents, and traps, same ag use pesticides that are used post-harvest, because we're considering everything pre-harvest to be on a different category here. Pasture and rangeland where forage will not be harvested, and ag use pesticides that are used to protect structures, livestock, or weeds in non-crop areas. So here's a picture from out west. Does the worker protection standard apply to seasonal conservation crews working on invasive weed control? Well, if we look here, if those weeds are not going to be harvested, no, it would not be in effect. Does it apply when pesticides are used on rangeland? Again, going back to that exceptions, only if that forage is going to be harvested will that WPS apply. So we've already just talked about where it applies. Who does it apply to? It applies to anyone who is labeled as a worker. And a worker through the WPS is defined as any person, including a self-employed person, might fit some of the members of the VVBGA here, who is employed and performs activities directly relating to the production of agricultural plants on an agricultural establishment. So if a person is a worker under the WPS, then what does that mean? It means that they have to directly be involved with production of those plants on that establishment. Now, a person is a worker on the WPS if they work in areas that were treated with a WPS labeled pesticide, like the one we just saw, within the last 30 days, or where a restricted entry interval, the REI, was in effect in the last 30 days. So what does directly related mean? Anyone who is harvesting, thinning, hand weeding, pest scouting, pruning, planting, any of those items, they're directly involved. Their hands are involved in that operation. What is not directly related? Well, delivering materials to the establishment, buying the pesticides or application equipment, carrying or moving pesticide containers that have never been opened, post-harvest handling of ag products outside of the treated area, caring for livestock, using herbicides in non-ag areas like roadsides and parking lots. And then what about a couple of other items like performing pest control? If those are in an office building or a building that is not used in ag production, then that would not be considered directly related. Who is considered a handler? Anyone who's going to be doing any mixing, loading, helping to apply or applying pesticides, anyone who is disposing of pesticides, anyone who's handling open containers, anyone who's acting as a flagger on the operation, and anyone who's cleaning, adjusting, handling, or repairing any equipment that may have pesticide residue on it. Anyone who enters an enclosed space after it was treated and before the ventilation criteria have been met. Anyone who's entering a treated area outside after application of a soil fumigant before aeration. And anyone who's performing tasks as a crop advisor during a pesticide application or reentry interval. So here's a picture of a farm stand at a farmer's market. Does the WPS apply to workers at the farm stand? Well, going back to the criteria, this is post-harvest. Therefore, anybody who is here is not going to need to be covered under worker protection standard. What about does a worker protection standard apply to workers who transport pesticides? Well, going back here, if somebody is directly involved in the production of ag plants, yes. If somebody is using the pesticides by carrying or moving containers, yes, only if they've never been opened. So in this picture here, it doesn't appear that those are open. This would not apply. What about in a warehouse? Worker protection standard would not apply to warehouse workers. It applies in fields treated less than 30 days ago. Then it definitely applies. And in this picture, plenty of folks working in the field and presumably pre-harvest, but they are in the field, and that would be where the worker protection standard applies. So going back to those tenets of worker protection standard, one of the basic fundamental tenets is to inform your workers and yourself about pesticide safety. Now, there's pesticide safety training, and there's train the trainers, and there's requirements for the trainers. And we're going to get into these a little bit. Can you do remote worker protection standard training? Are there any prepared materials that you can use? And the answer is yes. If you go back to the PERC full library, you can take a look and see that there's a lot of training materials, easy to navigate, and it's available to anybody who goes to that website. How does it work with labor contractors? Well, you'd have to have site-specific information. You have to know where is the central posting area. You have to make it very clear where are the decontamination facilities or supplies. And you also have to have record keeping. So anyone who's working on your property, you have to make all of this very much aware. Workers and handlers must be able to obtain information about pesticide applications, including the records and the safety data sheets that occurred when they are or when they were employed. And then facilities have to keep pesticide application records, SDS's training records for 2 years. And just an interesting note, in Oregon, the SDS's have to be maintained for 30 years. So what does a central posting look like? Well, this is an example of a farm's central posting area. It has hazard information, which is the safety data sheets for each pesticide. It has pesticide application information, which includes the start and the end of an application, plus the location and the description. And it also has pesticide safety information, including WPS posters or equivalent information. The Agency of Agriculture has plenty of these worker protection posters, both in English and in Spanish. And if anyone is interested, please contact me so I can get a poster to you. As part of our team, we have 4 agricultural resource management specialists located in different geographical territories throughout the state. Matt Wood, his territory is up in the northwestern part of the state, if you think of the state as being broken up into quadrants. Jessica Tessier is in the Northeast Kingdom. Dylan Davinaugh is in the southwest portion of the state, and Clark Parmalee is in the southeast portion of the state. And you can navigate to the Agency of Agriculture's website, or you can email me, and I'm happy to provide any more information, such as the phone numbers, a map, and email addresses. So if you have any questions, you'll have the appropriate folks to pose those questions to, and to get a poster as well. So SDS is for all pesticides that were applied in the last 30 days, or if the restricted entry interval is in effect in the last 30 days, have to be kept in a location accessible to both workers and handlers, and it's for their own protection. Is digital storage okay? It is, but you also have to have it displayed. You have to be able to have that sheet. What if your operation has many separate locations but one central posting site? Well, you want to make sure that you have a central posting wherever these are going to be applied at the farm. So make sure to have this information as widely available as possible. This is an example of a central posting in practice. A lot of information up on that, along with the posters, information from the EPA. There's some clipboards with pesticides that were applied for 30 days prior. And it also has some information from NPIC, which is the National Pesticide Information Center. Here's another example on the back of a spray rig. Central posting, as long as it's not going to move and it stays there, you can post. Where should you post the signs? When should they come down? And everyone should be familiar with this sign here, the danger peligro pesticide sign. Keep out. That's a standard sign. And you will find in the pesticide rule, the rule for control of pesticides, which went into effect February 24th, 2023, after being in effect unamended since August 2nd, 1991. We do have an example of that sign in that rule. And if anyone has questions or needs a sign, please, again, reach out. So what about indoor applications? Where do you post those signs, say in a greenhouse? If you have an indoor application, you're going to want to post that inside the greenhouse. What about updates to the pesticide application postings? Well, if it's outdoors, you have to have it up if the re-entry interval is greater than 48 hours. And if it's an enclosed space application, if the re-entry interval is greater than 4 hours, then you do have to have the posting available. So moving on to protect, and this is protect from potential pesticide exposure. There's a couple of items to be aware of: minimum age, the application exclusion zone, respiratory protection, and instruction for early entry workers. Minimum age for handlers, early entry workers, and member of owner's immediate family are exempt from this. But for handlers and early entry workers, you have to be 18. And again, in the pesticide rule, which was amended, you have to be 18 years old in order to be able to apply a pesticide. What about the application exclusion zone? Well, it could be one of three different measurements. The application exclusion zone could be 0, 25, or 100 feet. Employers must keep workers and other people out of the application exclusion zone on their own property, not other properties, just their own property. Applicators must suspend application whenever someone who is not involved in the application enters the AEZ, and the AEZ moves with the application. So if you can see that airplane on the screen, we don't have aerial applications approved as of right now, but say somebody is in a tractor or in an airplane, then the AEZ is going to move along with that piece of equipment. So how do you determine the size of the AEZ for your property? Well, it depends on the type of application. So if you have an aerial or air blast or any spray with smaller than medium droplet size, the pesticide label does not require the applicator to wear a respirator. Everyone in the AEZ must evacuate or shelter in place in a building, and people may return after the equipment passes. Then you have a 100-foot AEZ. For 25 feet, it's not aerial or air blast. Droplets are medium size or larger, and the pesticide is applied more than 12 inches from the ground or planting medium, and there is no waiting period to go back into the zone after the equipment passes. You can lower that AEZ. It can be even lowered to 0 feet if there's any other application equipment which is not aerial or air blast, and the pesticide is applied less than 12 inches from the ground or planting medium. So this is an example of the treated area in blue. The field is green. The airplane, which is spraying, is moving, and the AEZ is surrounding the airplane. And so the AEZ, again, moves with the application. All right. And now here is an example of your field versus a neighboring field. All right. So you have to suspend if anyone walks in who is not supposed to. If they move, then you can proceed with caution. And when the application is finished, the AEZ no longer exists. This was an update to the rule, so it's important that if you that you have to understand this. If you don't understand this part about making sure that nobody comes onto your property while the application is being made, then please get in contact with me and I can explain it further. All right. So you have to, as an employer, you have to provide and require the use of PPE, and you as the employer will provide that PPE. I do think I'm running a little bit out of time here, and I want to be able to have some time for questions. So I'm going to provide the slide deck to Vern to give out to everybody in the group. I just wanted to transition very quickly into H2A housing inspections. My staff go out on H2A housing inspections. These are pre-occupancy housing inspections for agricultural employers. And the employers will have agricultural staff coming to their operations probably over the course of a season. So it depends on the crop, but right now, folks are coming out to gear up for vegetable and berry and farms of that nature, maple syrup. Usually their workers come in November. And we have a memorandum of understanding with the Vermont Department of Labor. The Vermont Department of Labor manages H2A visas. Those are the agricultural visas for workers to enter the United States and work on an agricultural employer. While we're going out there, making sure the housing is appropriate and is checked off so that it's good, it meets the federal burden and the state mandates for housing, my staff are delivering to the employer a packet of information. And in that packet of information is a letter with an attestation at the very end where the employer is going to attest that worker protection standard has not applied to my ag establishment at any time during the past few years. Or I understand that if I use a WPS labeled pesticide product on my ag establishment, then WPS applies. Or WPS currently applies to my ag establishment, and I understand that I may receive an inspection by the agency to ensure compliance with the WPS requirements. We also have a respirator fit test record and an employee respirator training record that we're handing out to make it easier for all the ag employers out there. We are also handing out a treated area information record keeping form. We developed this. It meets all of the mandates of the pesticide rule. And that's important. If you use what we're providing you and you fill it out completely and adequately, then you should most likely not be running afoul of our pesticide rule or any other regulations or laws. We also have a verification of pesticide safety training for worker protection standard with information that you will be writing down, such as your establishment name, your address, and then the trainee's name and their signature. And we are also passing out the 2015 revised How to Comply manual. Light reading, but it's certainly very, very important. And you'll notice it is also not only put out by the EPA, but also put out by PERC who has the website with all of that other information, and is also where my agency obtains the posters from. When we do those H2A inspections, Mike is going to talk about what potentially could happen after the H2A inspection. Are there any questions about WPS?
That was a lot of information. It's a complicated rule. So is the perk library the best place for people to go to try and absorb what they need to do? Or is there a simplified guidance somewhere else?
Of course, that's a great question, Vern. Anybody is welcome to go to that PERC website. However, if you want the process demystified, I'm happy to talk to anybody who wants to shoot the breeze about WPS. Also, like I mentioned, the agricultural resource management specialists on my staff are also more than happy to go to your property and find out if WPS applies to your operation.
And very quickly, if I was to summarize this in 20 seconds, what I learned is if you're applying any material, organic or conventional, that has an ag use requirement box on its label, you need to do the central posting, providing the information required about when it was applied and reentry and all that. You need to make sure the people applying it are wearing the proper PPE to protect themselves. And you need to keep people out of the area for the reentry period duration. And if you're not using an air blast sprayer, my understanding from you said is there is no actual exclusion zone while you're using it. It's just that immediate area, right? It's only airplane or air blast that it starts to become a bigger space.
Yeah, it's when the droplet size is smaller and more misty and has the potential
Okay.
for drift. So if you tie it to that, then make sure that you read the AEZ components. And if you have questions, please contact me.
And Dale is asking if you apply a pesticide outdoors that is in that category and it has a 12-hour REI or less, you don't need to post. And in the tunnel, it was 4 hours or less. Is that true?
If you give me
It
one
was
second.
48. I thought it was 48 outdoors, you said.
Yeah, I think it's 48. Yeah, if it's REI greater than 48 hours for outdoors and then greater than 4 for indoors.
Okay. All right. I'm sure you'll be hearing from people with follow-up questions. And we're going to move on to Michael Desrochers from the Fire Safety Division. And Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you and I'll start sharing your slides.
Thank you very much. First of all, thanks everybody for listening in. And I'm going to go through this slide deck pretty quick. But at the very end of the slide deck, there's I provided some links, contact information and so forth. So if you have any questions, certainly reach out to me. The Division of Fire Safety is under the Department of Public Safety. Our headquarters building is actually at the Waterbury State Police Headquarters building, just for reference. So real quickly, the Division of Fire Safety's mission is to protect the public and the fire service through coordinated efforts in code enforcement, fire service training, public education, hazardous material response, fire investigation, and urban search and rescue. Within the realm of that, we do all construction permitting, plan review, and inspections for compliance with the life safety code and the building codes. We also license all the trade professionals, including electricians, plumbing, heat techs, fire alarm installers, boiler inspectors, sprinkler system installers, chimney sweeps, and others. So the Division of Fire Safety, I thought what I might do is just start out by just giving a real quick overview. We have a district office located in Williston. We have one in Waterbury, one in Springfield, one in Rutland. Our special teams are housed in Colchester, and our Vermont Fire Academy Training Center is down in Pittsford. So basically our jurisdictional authority over public buildings can be found in 20 VSA Chapter 173, and I'm not going to read all this, but basically, for the purpose of this little program here, residential rental properties, including accessory dwelling units, if rented short-term, long-term, or as part of farm housing, fall under the jurisdiction of the Division of Fire Safety. And then again, we do all commercial buildings too. So what I want to touch base on here a little bit is that we do have different, what we call occupancy classifications. An occupancy classification is a designation reflecting the primary use of a structure while considering such things as risk, human behavior, how many people you can put in the building, hazardous area protection, exits, and so forth. The occupancy classification is what drives the level of life safety and protection to safeguard occupants from fire, accidental electrocution, and hazardous material releases. There are several different residential occupancies that I'll touch base on here. The first one is 1 and 2 family dwellings. This actually is very common for farm housing. This is where you can have up to 8 outsiders or guests, farm workers residing in a dwelling, again, whether short-term or long-term. This occupancy classification has the least restrictive code requirements to comply with because you only have 2 units. The next one is multi-units. That's where you have 3 or more dwelling units that are within one structure. And those codes become a little more restrictive because under this occupancy, you could have up to, say, 20, 30, 40 apartment units in a building or structure, and there's certain minimum safety standards that you're responsible to comply with. And then the bigger one here is the rooming and lodging, which we see this in some of our farm housing, and that's where you house between 9 and 16 guests, again, in a single structure. Requirements here get a little more restrictive simply because the guests are transient in nature. Usually the guest room doors open up in the common areas, and it's not such a divided dwelling unit like you find in a duplex. I've listed a few things we look for there, including some of the risks that are associated with rooming and lodging. And then we can skip over the hotel motel section. So just a couple quick broad overviews of safety issues. All new smoke alarms must be hardwired into the building's electrical system with battery backup. So if you have farm housing and you're wanting to consider renting or provide housing for your farm worker, one of the things that you would consider is that you need to have smoke alarms installed. And again, I've put here in the slide deck where they have to be located. Same thing with carbon monoxide alarms. You're required to have carbon monoxide alarms. Most of this here is pretty basic design criteria. And at the end of the slide deck here, I have a link to our webpage, and there's tons of information on smoke and carbon monoxide alarms. In Vermont, we have a photoelectric smoke alarm requirement, which is on the slide deck. Next, one of the major components you want to look at when you're just scanning your structure that you're going to provide housing for is that every sleeping room has to have 2 means of escape. One of them is the primary means of escape, which is usually the entrance door to the sleeping area, and the secondary means of escape being a window. And what I've done here is I've included the minimum dimensions for a window. So basically you need 2 ways out of that bedroom. It doesn't have to be a door, but it does have to be a window meeting certain criteria. Next, please. So here's an example of an existing egress window. If you walk into an existing bedroom that you plan on having farm housing there, you have to be at least 24 inches in height, 20 inches in width. And when you take these 2 dimensions and you multiply those, you have to come out with a clear openable area of 5 square feet. So this window that I'm showing right here, a fire department person can take that window completely out with tools. And so what we do on existing buildings is we allow you to take advantage of the whole entire window opening, right? The rough opening. So we're going to allow you to consider the fire department's going to rip that entire window out. And so you can take advantage of that entire space. The reason we did this, we see a lot of these smaller windows in existing buildings. And then new egress windows typically have to be a little bit larger. The new windows are required to be a little larger. The rough openings, again, are the same 20 by 24 inches. And the whole bottom sash of a double hung window, for example, would have to meet the 5.7 square feet in area. And I don't want to get down into the weeds with this, but we have plenty of diagrams in our on our webpage that you can look at. Heating systems must be serviced by a certified technician at least once every 2 years, but not less than recommended by the manufacturer. So if a heating system manufacturer says it's got to be cleaned once a year, then that's what needs to be done. And we have a 2-year minimum requirement in our rules. If you have to go up a flight of stairs, you know, we're looking for a circular or some type of graspable handrail. Those are positioned 34 to 38 inches measured vertically from the nose of the tread. And then another item, landings, decks, porches, and other platforms higher than 30 inches from grade where somebody could fall must be provided with a guard to prevent occupants from falling off the floor area. Existing guards may remain at 30 inches and the other guards at 42. This is an important one here. The reason I bring this up is because this can be a little expensive. But each dwelling unit must be provided with a bathroom separated from the living area. There must be a toilet and shower. All plumbing work must be completed by a licensed master plumber, and the plumber is required to file a plumbing work notice. Electrical wiring must be maintained in a safe manner. All outlet receptacle and junction boxes properly secured and covered. So a lot of this stuff you can determine yourself just doing a general walkthrough. Do I have this in place now? If you notice outlet receptacles out of within 6 feet of sinks, they need to be GFI protected. So if somebody accidentally drops an electrical appliance in water, they're not electrocuted. I'm not going to get into the details too much right here, but this just gets into a little more detail about rooming and lodging, and some examples of what other additional items are required once you get into providing housing in one structure with between 9 and 16 people. If you're doing alterations and renovations to the building that you're going to use for farm housing, we do require a construction permit application. I provided the link at the end of this slide deck. If the project is minor in scope, meaning to start with, if it's under $200,000, we have an abbreviated construction permit application form. It's about a page, very easy to fill out. And what that does is it kind of triggers what we call a field review. And the fire marshal comes out to the site and would meet with you, and then you go over what your plans are, and then you all have a conversation right there. And that when that fire marshal leaves the site, you all are on the same page with what needs to be done. We also, okay, here we are. We do regulate the ADA regulations, but in existing buildings, we don't do much enforcement with the ADA in existing buildings. And next, here are some links to our webpage. A lot of material on our webpage. We have an interactive map where if you're in a Pacific town, say Rutland, you click on the map, Rutland, it'll show you contact information for that fire marshal. and also our district offices. There's a link here to our rental housing health and safety code, which applies to farm housing. And there's the link to our Division of Fire Safety's construction permit applications. And again, if there's any questions or you want the Division of Fire Safety to meet with a group of people, we'd be more than happy to. And if anybody's got any questions, feel free to ask.
Thanks for that. A question I have is there a checklist somewhere if somebody's considering housing to know what they're in for?
We're going to, I'm going to say it's not completed yet, but we are working on a farm housing. It won't be a specific checklist, but it will be a guidance document where it will bring up a lot of the high ticket items like or common items, but basically until an inspector really goes out to a specific site, you can't always pick out all the items, right? So we will have a document that will cover most of the major stuff. I mean, we can't see the structural stability of something. You know, there could be some wiring issues that we can't see until you're out there at the site. So there's just certain things, you know, a propane tank within 10 feet of a driveway. The list could go on and on about what to look for. But we will put together a guidance document that will be very helpful for people.
Thanks. And of course, a lot of our farms are small and don't have many employees. And can you say where the threshold is for these regulations kicking in? I mean, if someone's staying in a room in the farm owner's home, that you started with that residential structures are not covered, so that would not be
I don't think we'd be into somebody's home if they have their home and they have a farm helper there in the house, that we would be intruding on that particular.
How about an apartment in the house?
Right, if there's an apartment in the house, then the Division of Fire Safety does have authority. And what that means is, if you have a fire in that particular structure and you have a fire fatality, the building owner is responsible to have some of these minimum life safety things in play. So that would include especially your smoke and CO alarms. If I was going to leave here with a message, it would be to make sure you have smoke and CO alarms in your house. We've had 8 fatalities already this year in January and February of 2025, which is more than what we had for the whole year in 2024, all in single family owner occupied homes.
And when does the hard wiring requirement for that kick in?
If it's all new. So if your home is lacking complete smoke alarms right now, and you're going to install new smoke alarms, then they need to be hardwired. What I would say is this: if it's going to take a while to get the hardwired ones installed, I would just put the 10-year tamper-resistant lithium-ion combination smoke and CO devices in, and that would buy you time to get an electrician in to do the hardwiring. And then again, I'm sorry.
I'm hearing you saying a good faith effort is acceptable in the short term.
Correct. At least, you know, we try to work with people. I want to emphasize this to the audience that's going to be watching this. We like to think that we work with people, that we're not coming in with a hammer down type approach to these to farm housing, right? We want to work with people, but I know that there's some restraints and there's some time restraints going through the H2A process. And so what we try to do is, if somebody's putting in an honest effort and being proactive, we're going to work with these folks. So,
And you just mentioned H2A, but these requirements are not dependent on the type of occupant, correct?
correct. It is all based on whether you, right. Doesn't matter whether you're farm housing or not. If you're renting or you have a mobile home on your property and you have farm workers staying in that mobile home, then you need smoke and CO alarms, and our regulations apply. There's a specific exemption in 20 VSA Chapter 173 that exempts the exemptions for public buildings. There's a carve out for farm housing. So farm housing is not exempt from our definition of a public building. So the statute specifically requires us to regulate those particular occupancies.
Well, thanks to you both for presenting. It's a lot to chew on, and it's good to have it recorded, and so folks can go back and visit it before they apply pesticides or house employees on their farm. Well, thank you very much, and I'll remind folks we have 2 more sessions coming up in this webinar series. Next week is brassica pests, and the last week will be about the new neonicotinoid pesticide restrictions in the state of Vermont. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.